Hello and welcome to this week's review of the latest episode of My Hero Academia titled A Young Woman's Declaration. You know the rules and so do I. Let me know what you thought about this week's episode down in the comment section down below and you will be read out in next week's show. Whilst you're there, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today. You'll do them a power of good. Now, on to the review. And here we are with the penultimate episode of this year's season. In the meantime, I just want you to start thinking about what your thoughts and feelings about this season as a whole, because on the 1st of April, I will be doing my big season review video, so get your thoughts in, ideally for next week, so it gives me time to go over them for the big review. Anyway, as we always do at the start of one of our reviews, let us begin with the positives. And starting out with something minor towards the actual start of this week's episode, which is that I didn't mind the tecnobabble bit at the start of this week's episode. I'll be honest, like it or not, this is something that we needed to hear. We needed something to justify how these defences could possibly hope to stand up against a villain attack, particularly an attack by the big bad villains that we have in this show. I think that it was always going to end up being a lingering issue in the back of our minds had this not been clarified ahead of time, so it is just good to get a little bit of a rundown now, even if it does feel a little bit of a exposition dump. Of course, another way to look at it is that this is setting up for things later on, because in the event that there is ever a big villain attack on this location, like this is the location of the big final fight, well, then it sets up all the drama, doesn't it? Because I can quite easily see a moment where they're like, oh no, the people mover isn't working, we need to go down there and stop it. And then they send a couple of heroes down and they have their big final fight against whomever their rival happens to be, and that's just how that kind of some stuff ends up going. We all know that's the kind of thing they'll end up doing. Whether or not they will end up doing that, we'll soon see. And of course, beyond anything else, that whole speech gave the principal something to do. It's given our extended cast things to do, something that they really haven't done. Sure, I'm not exactly keen on his whole hand wave thing of, oh, I had a hunch that Tomura was going to learn how to use his decay beams at a longer range, so I just kind of improvise. I'm not so keen on that, really. I think that there's been way too many assumptions going on in this program, as I explained in last week's video towards the end of it, but I'm willing to forgive it, because at the end of the day, whether or not this actually ends up evolving into something that actually happens, we'll soon see. Though, of course, when he ends up explaining just how he's paid for all of this, I'm just thinking to myself, wow, that they could have just said, oh yeah, he got a grant or something. Him paying for it all kind of feels like a bit of a stretch, because what is he going to be there? I just in the back of my head, I'm just imagining going, well, now I'm in crippling debt. I've paid all my money on these defences, so I hope they work. And if they don't work, I hope that I can get them on sale or return. Oh God, I'm in crippling debt. They'll soon see. Maybe they'll get used, maybe they won't get used. It feels weird to spend all this time setting all that stuff up if they're not going to get used, but we'll see that all that goes in next season. I don't think we'll be seeing it next week, but certainly something we might see next season or the season after that, if there is one. Of course, the meat of this episode is its emotional core, though at this point it's less of a core and more of the sum total of it all. This, I'll be honest, feels like the end of the aftermath stuff. It will still be there, and we'll still see elements of it going forward, but I feel that this is the apex of it. This is the crescendo moment of it. We'll still see parts of it, but it won't be the focus of everything going forward. It won't be as much in the foreground as it has been up until this moment. This is the time when we just get all the big set-piece moments that you'd expect from a moment like this. We have people protesting, people getting angry, people ranting and raving about heroes and their worth within society. We get the shot of the guy's phone with all the articles or videos of people wagging their fingers at superheroes and debating whether or not we should support them and who is the real hero and all that kind of stuff. Stuff that I've been wanting to see for pretty much the entirety of the time that we've had the aftermath stuff, but we're getting it here and now, maybe not in quite the way that I would have hoped it would have been, but I am glad that they're actually addressing it, they're actually showing it. Again, I think that maybe it should have been spread out a little bit more. I think that this total collapse of society has been a little bit too quick and fast in some regards, but hey ho, I guess that they just wanted to get this show over and done with, so they've had to expedite certain things. But that's, I think at the end of the day, that's more of a different strokes of different folks kind of thing. Just because it would be different doesn't mean to say it would be better and all that kind of stuff. I think that, of course, we have to tackle the central point, the main nexus for all the emotional weight within this week's episode, which is Uraraka's speech. I will be honest with you, it's difficult to cover it in a video like this, or indeed in any kind of review, because there's so many aspects of it, it's hard to really pin it down into a single coherent stream, because there's many elements that make it as good as it is. Purely from a writing point of view, I think that it was well written and totally pitch perfect for her. I feel that, and this is from my own experience both as a writer and from someone who's been working in the entertainment industry in some form or another for the past 15 or so years, I feel that with many writers, when it comes to speech writing, it doesn't always feel authentic to the character that's speaking. The turns of phrase that they use, the ventures into what they're saying at times can become overly verbose. It feels less like something that character would actually say, or more like something that the writer themselves would actually say. And that in that moment, that character is acting more as a vessel for the writer than they are for the drama or their feelings in that scene. This can lead to two things. Either it is simply a case of the writer just getting so lost in the moment they're forgetting the character, or alternatively it's the writer wanting to be seen as being a sophisticated, articulate and creative artist more so than an actual creator of drama or a creator of any kind of real true narrative. And that isn't the case here. That certainly isn't the case here, because what we get with Uraraka's speech feels authentic to her. It genuinely feels so. Whilst there is this powerfully passionate part of her coming forward, a passion for not just being a hero, but of course for her romantic interest for Midoriya, there is still this heroic sense of professionalism within her. She's trying to appeal to the crowd both in a rational way by just talking them through every aspect of this place and as to the realities of the situation they all find themselves in, but also trying to reach them emotionally. Because let's be honest, in a situation like that, if you lean too far into one, the other's going to overcome it. If you try to be irrational to people in a situation like this, the emotive side's going to take over them, and they're going to say, "You're lying, you're just saying this to make us feel better." And if you try the emotional side of things, they're just going to turn around and say, "Well, that's all great and good, but that doesn't help us in the practical sense of things." And in the end, she gets the balance right. I'm not sure how I would grade it as a singular speech, though, in terms of how good or not it is in the grander canon of My Hero Academia, but I think that certainly in this episode, in this season, it has been a great sequence. Sure, people can and no doubt will argue how realistic something like this would be, how realistic a speech like this would be, but for a start, it works for the narrative, whilst I'm sure that the CinemaSins-esque wannabes will be bitching and moaning about it, say, "Well, realistically, what's the speech by little girl really going to do? I mean, it's not going to change anything, is it?" At the same time, as far as it goes for the story, it needs something like this to happen. This is the perfect time for something like this to happen. And the other point that I would make is quite simply that, well, whilst we may roll our eyes at monologues, it's not as though they don't happen spontaneously in real life, is it? So the argument that monologues themselves aren't realistic, I always just find, well, terribly tiresome. And they just think it reflects on people spending more time with people that don't know how to articulate their feelings properly, or just refuse to do so. Or alternative, they're so naive to what their friends are saying in the moments where they are saying these things that they don't understand it. Whilst narratively it might seem a little bit corny, in reality there are plenty of moments where people just break down and just vent their spleen upon the world and just rant and rave and express passionately about how they feel in a given situation. And whether or not you find that realistic or not is, for me, a hard thing to do, because people do it all the time. I mean, you could argue that these reviews themselves are monologues, given that it is myself speaking about my emotions and talking about how I feel about this kind of show. Of course, that's all a discussion for all the time, and I think we're getting a little bit sidetracked, so back to the matter at hand. All of this speech, I feel, is coupled with some really great animation. Whilst it is not the best animation we've had this season, and not the best we've had with the entire run of My Hero Academia, I think that it is brilliantly put together for just how expressive it can be. Throughout it, we are seeing the true weight of everything pressing down on everyone present. From the heroes, to Midoriya, to the audience, to the protesters, we see all. Everyone is broken, tired, and emotional. Many of them have long since passed their breaking point and aren't willing to go down any further. You understand why the people who are protesting, because as far as they're concerned in this moment, Midoriya is the source of all the problems, and he's just going to bring them all to them. And even if they don't blame Midoriya specifically, they are so done with hero kind that they really don't want anything else from them, and the only reason they're accepting of them right now is because they simply can't defend themselves, or they're unwilling to. They're not wanting to get those Redestro gadgets that are currently out in the wild. And we just see this all with everyone. We see it with Midoriya and just how run down he looks. Whilst I'm sure that he would argue otherwise, it looks like he is close to his breaking point, at least physically. It looks like he's just a couple more fights away from not being able to stand anymore, which makes my comments last week in the negatives feel slightly redundant, because I think I was looking at that too much in a physical sense and more in an emotive sense, but here and now I think that it works. I think that it really does work. And of course, towards the end of this episode, we get the clarification, and it's one of those you might not have noticed it, but your brain did moments. This is the moment where we have Midoriya going from saying, "This is a story how I became the greatest hero," to him saying, "This is the moment how we all became the greatest heroes." It is a small deal, but I think that it sets things up in a way which, I'll be honest, is rather interesting. It shakes things up in a way that I don't think many people are going to be quite so receptive of here and now. Though, of course, I think many of the true fans will get it. I think many of the people who have been watching this quite as intently as some of us have been doing will get it. But, you know, it's one of those moments I think it will go under the radar for some people until it fully reveals itself. Of course, that little moment, it does kind of knacker up an element of a video that we're going to be working on once this season was done, and I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board on that, but for here and now, for me, it does kind of open the doors up a little bit, kind of makes things seem a little bit more freer, a little more open as to how all this will end up going, which I think's interesting. I'll admit, as I've said many times before, I had many things spoilt for me. This is one of the things which kind of undoes something like that, makes things a little bit more in flux than maybe they did do before. Anyway, with all that said and done, let us get into the negatives, and I will admit, this is, if I was to do a list of my biggest nitpicks, this will be the week where I get one of my biggest nitpicks, or at least two. In this week's episode, there's a couple little animation flubs. Though one, I'm not sure if you can really call it a flub. With one of them, well, to be honest, they're both connected to Shoto. One of them comes, I think, around the midway point in the episode where you have that shot of him and Hawks and Endeavor stood outside. And I think they're listening to Uraraka's speech, but Shota has this very weird expression on his face. It looks like he's got trapped wind or something. The expression on his face doesn't quite match up for how he really should be looking. And I think that it's just a case of they've essentially just scanned over the panel in the manga and maybe something else was been said before then and things got cut and it doesn't quite work out that way. But either way, expression on his face just looks a little bit weird, it's a little bit distracting. And the second one is towards the end of the episode where he turns to Endeavor and he says, "We're in this together, Dad." And if you look on his left eye, you can see that the layer of animation for his left eye is over the stretch of hair that goes over across his eye. You can just see this square, this white square going over his hair. I will admit, yeah, bit of a nitpick, but still stuff that I picked up upon. And usually that would be because of a case of, oh, I'm not finding it all interesting, so I'm just distracted by nonsense, but I don't think that's the case. I just think it's a case of I was enjoying the animation so much and trying to drink it all in that some of this stuff just stood out to me a little bit more than it should have done. But anyway, let's get into the overview. Overall, there's not much else to say. I think this was a great episode. I think the drama, once again, was very rich. It was very full. This was what feels like the emotional climax of this year's season. Of course, we do have one more episode left, and by the looks of that, that's going to set up for All Might versus Hero Killer Stain. Exactly how that'll all transpire, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to lean more interaction or more into emotive or try and do a balance of the two, but we'll soon see about that. But still, this week's episode, great, good. It's been a refreshing change of pace. It feels good. I don't really have anything else to say about it, so with that all said and done, let's get into Comment Corner! And now it's time for Comment Corner. Only one comment this week, once again coming from Big X1, who says, "The word of the day is antultimate, it seems. I like this week's episode. I wish the fight had gone on longer. Don't think I agree on the point of Deku's injuries. One for all likely made him more durable, or at least has taken a lot of the damage for him. Plus he has those bands to keep him together too." Thank you for the comment, and I can appreciate the reasoning of it, and like I've said previously, I do think that my criticisms for the fact that despite everything Midoriya is still able to stand, I do want to kind of clarify that, and I think I was being a little bit too short-sighted with that. And again, I can appreciate the reasoning from your comment. I think that comment did go some way to help me realise I was being a little bit too overly critical with that. I think that an interesting point with that, as I mentioned in my comment, is that it does show that maybe Midoriya could have still beaten them, that he was still out of their league even despite everything that happened to him, and that, hell, maybe had he got a good night's sleep before, then he still would have won, which itself is an interesting idea. Though, like I said last week, I think that the gap in power between him and them is a lot narrower than I think a lot of people are giving credit for, but I think that's a discussion for a whole other time on a whole other video. Still, thank you for your comment. If you want to leave a comment, you could do so by going to the comment section down below and let me know what you thought about this week's episode, and you will be read out in next week's show. In the meantime, have a think, have a ponder, have a percolate as to what your feelings about this season as a whole are. I will be doing my season-long review on the 1st of April, so, you know, get them in before then and they'll be read for then. And I don't really have anything else to say, just to say thank you all for listening and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!